fact, I live just a few miles from one of the nation's largest Mauser Electronics. But this time, I decided to try buying all of these parts from eBay. I bought nearly all of the parts from a single seller on eBay. That way I was able to get combined shipping, so all of the parts ended up costing me about $20. But I did end up with enough parts to build at least 5 of these things, because most of the eBay listings require that you get a handful of whatever part you need. Of course, that can be a good thing if you're prone to messing up and need spares. So I started the build by inserting the long-legged socket for SID number 1. Soldering these things is time-consuming, but it's actually really negative signs. The negative is indicated by the stripe down the side of the capacitor. The transistor took a bit of thought for me, and it helped to reference this diagram, but with the silk screen on the opposite side of the board, it did make it confusing. Okay, so at this point, the board was finished except for the filter caps, and I didn't know which filter caps to use until I knew what kind of SID chips I was going to be using, and that brings up the other dilemma. You see, there's 2 types of SID chips. There's the 6581, which runs at 12 volts, and 8580, which runs at 9 volts. Now, typically the older style breadbin uses the 6581, while the newer style 64C uses the 8580, as well as the Commodore 128. So you cannot mismatch SID chips at 2 of them, and one of them was broken and won't power. Repeat this process all over again. Next, I put the computer just enough back together from any of the 3 voices. The chip was dead. Just to make sure I wasn't crazy, I put the original SID chip back in there to test it again. Alright, so I've got the originals. Well, that's not entirely true. There is one inside my working Commodore 128, but I'm not about to scrap this thing just to take the SID chip out of it. So, on to plan B. I have a working breadbin C64, which you saw in my last video. I thought I might have a spare somewhere in the attic. I have crates full of old computers up there. Some are working, many are not. I dug out an old crummy-looking C64. This sucker has seen better days, that's for sure. After a brief test, I confirmed that this unit would not power up. So, time to salvage its SID chip. After taking it apart, there was a problem. In this particular unit, Commodore didn't put any sockets for any of the chips. They're soldered directly to the logic board. This was going to be a monumental pain to get this thing out, and there was no guarantee it was even going to work. So first, I had to unsolder and remove the RF shield from the bottom, and then I began the laborious process of desoldering the chip. It took about 25 minutes to finally get all of the pins free, and it felt like such a victory to see that chip come out of the board. But the big question to be answered was, did it work? So, much like before, I removed the SID chip from the working C64 and tried this one. Success! All 3 voices work fine. So, then I could go ahead and install my filter caps since I knew which type of SID I was going to be using. I also needed a way to hear sound from SID number 2. Now, my plan was to put an additional RCA jack on the back of the Commodore 64. I did a similar modification to a Casio keyboard by drilling holes in the case and using panel mount RCA jacks. This same process should be just as easy on the C64 as there's plenty of extra space on the back of the case. But for the meantime, I just wanted a way to test the SID to SID. So I took a spare RCA cable like this. I have a box full of them. So I just cut the end off and stripped the end and soldered it right to you because it's except I ran into anything about this. Of course, so, like a heat sink to keep the video chip cool. So I decided to do some. I gave it some new thermal grease and put it back together, and everything fit perfectly. Unfortunately, it still didn't work. I got sound from SID number 1, but no sound from SID number 2. Upon closer examination, I discovered I had been a bonehead and put the transistor in backwards. So, I desoldered and threw it in the trash in case I damaged it, and I used one of those spares I told you about. I put in the new transistor and tried it again, and lo and behold, it worked. Alright, well I hope you enjoyed that. You'll have to wait till the next episode for me to explore the Messiah cartridge so that I can show you better usage of the dual SID chip. I would also like to point out, although this was a huge pain and it took nearly 2 days to complete this task, a lot of it was poor planning on my part. I should have had a dual SID configuration tested and ready before the card even got here. Maybe even bought a SID chip online. That might have made things a bit easier.
The Keurig K-Cafe brewer lets you easily make your favourite coffee house drinks, like this creamy caribou coffee cappuccino.
Hello, and the card I want to take a look at today is this replica of the Adlib card. Now you might ask, why would anybody want to call it the Adlib card? If you take a look at eBay, you'll see that right now there's only one original Adlib card for sale right now. It's in Canada and it has 7 days left on the auction, and it's already bid up pretty high. What's worse is this one is even listed as untested, so they won't even guarantee this card works. And if you go back and look at completed listings to get an idea of what these things have actually sold for, well, this top one here for $100 is actually another clone. I don't know if it's the same clone I have here, but the next two in the list are the real things, and this one sold for $360, and the next one sold for $450. So genuine Adlib cards are very rare these days and very expensive. And since the card isn't that complicated and all of the parts are still available today, it sort of makes sense why people are cloning it. Now, this clone looks really nice, but there are some differences I'll point out. First of all, one dead giveaway that this is a clone is that all of the chips are socketed. I don't think any real Adlib cards had socketed chips. Also, the original Adlib came with a larger style headphone jack, like this, but later models did move to the smaller one, so this clone, if anything, is just replicating the later models. So I'm going to be using this computer to test the card in. Now, I borrowed this from DJ. This is just a kind of AMD K6 clone machine from probably the late 1990s. And the reason I'm borrowing this is because the only machines I have in the house which have the ISA style connector in them is my old Tandy 1000, and it runs at 4.77 megahertz. So it's really not fast enough to properly demonstrate, some of the software that I'm going to want to show you. So this will work fine. Instead of a hard drive, I've got most everything I need loaded onto this compact flash card, and I'm going to just pop this into the little IDE adapter thingamajig, and this just goes right down into one of the IDE controller slots, like that. And next I'll insert the Adlib replica, and we'll see if it works. I'm going to load up one of my favorite games, Ultima 6. I'll run the setup first, and I'll select video mode, VGA. Do I have a Microsoft mouse? Actually, at the moment I don't, so I'll say no. And here we go, sound card setup. I'll select the Adlib synthesizer card. You may notice a note down here at the bottom that says all sound effects are heard through your PC speaker. And this is because the game only plays music with the sound cards, no matter which card you select, and it still relies on the internal speaker for sound effects. Anyway, let's fire this thing up. Sounds like it's working to me. I'm going to skip ahead to one of my favorite Adlib tunes. Of course, in the actual gameplay here, you can only hear the music and no sound effects because I'm recording directly from the sound card, and all of the sound effects are coming from the PC speaker. Okay, well, moving along, I want to show you another fascinating card. Now, this is another replica of an even more rare sound card. It's based on the Innovation SSI 2001. Now, if you'll notice, the main socket here is empty, but it's labeled that it needs a 6581 chip. Well, that's the SID chip from the Commodore 64. Now, this replica card doesn't actually come with a SID chip. However, any SID chip should work, so I'm just going to go ahead and borrow the SID chip right here on my Commodore 64. So, where did this obscure sound card originally come from? Well, the first mention of this card can be found in the 1987 release of the game Gunship by Microprose. In the README file, it says, support has been... Games are known to support this card, and that's Gunship itself officially sold. Which is too bad, because in 1987, the only established sound card for PCs had been the Tandy 1000's integrated 3-voice sound system, which had come to market in 1984. But up to this point, most regular IBM and compatible machines had to make do with the little one-voice PC speaker. 1987 was kind of the year when all of that changed, because that's also the year the AdLib card came to market, along with the Game Blaster. And yes, that's right, that was actually a card that came out before the Sound Blaster that everyone's heard of, as well as the Roland MT32. However, 2 years later in the sound synthesis at 100. Trouble is, in sound drivers back in the day, to give your sound card a universally failed in the supporting their, it might have stood a chance. Still, there are a handful of games that support it. If you go to Moby Games and you type in Innovation, you can click on the sound card type here, and it will show all compatible games with this sound card. And there are only 13 listed. What's worse, I downloaded all of these games and found that only about half of them actually had support, meaning that support was probably removed in later releases, or that the copies that wound up being archived on abandonware sites may have simply had the necessary files removed. However, there are still a few I can show you, but first I'll need to borrow the SID chip from my Commodore 64. Here we go. I'll just pull this out.
Sorry!
And I'll stick that right down in there. I also wanted to mention the original card could only support the 6581, but this card can actually support the later 8580 SID chip as well, which runs at a different voltage and sounds somewhat different. And you may notice right there by my thumbnail, there's a little jumper wire. So to use the later chip, you would need to cut that and replace it with a transistor and some other changes. Okay, let's remove the AdLib replica card and replace it with the SSI replica. Now, I'm going to run the setup again for Ultima 6, and this time I'm going to pick option 6 for innovation. I can tell the music is a little different, probably due to only having 3 voices. Let's skip to the next song. While this sounds a million times better than the PC speaker, I gotta say the AdLib version still sounds much better. So back to the innovation card for a moment. Here's the actual gameplay. Again, music only because the sound effects are coming from the PC speaker. Let's look at another game. This is Bad Blood, which is another Origin game and also supports the innovation card. The music is okay, I guess, but it's relatively underwhelming. Now, one thing I wondered about is if the actual C64 version of the game sounded exactly the same, since it is the same sound chip. So I downloaded the C64 version and tried it out. The music is actually totally different, and I go so far as to say much better. Totally backwards from the MS-DOS version. Here's another game called Battletech, the Crescent Hawk's Revenge. Interestingly, in the setup, you can choose your graphics card, so I'll pick VGA. And for music device, they actually do not list the innovation card at all. But for the sound device selection, they do list innovation here. So let's try it out.
Infocom presents the Crescent Hawk's Revenge.
Yeah, so apparently it only uses the SID chip for digital sound samples, not at all for music. Well, let's try something else. This is a DOS program designed to play actual C64 SID tunes over an SSI card. Let's try Commando. The 6581 chip out. I want to try something else. This is a SwinSID Ultimate. It's a modern replacement for a SID chip. It's actually a microcontroller that emulates the SID. And this is a really amazing little piece of engineering here. It's too bad that nobody can actually produce real SID chips anymore, so this is the closest we can get. Well, let's stick this down in here. This isn't what this chip was designed to work in, but it'll still be interesting to see if it works.
You're the greatest person I know, and since you love coffee and lattes and cappuccinos, I got you.
I'm doing here either, so I guess somehow I'm supposed to indicate which piece I want to move, but anyway, I'll have to read up on that later. Moving on, you can also send basic programs much in the same way. First, you just go into basic, in this case AppleSoft Basic, and I'll send over a text file for Hangman. Again, it's like I'm typing in the Hangman game really fast. However, when it's done, it errors out. So I'm thinking maybe it was designed for integer basic instead, so I'll change over to that version and then try it again. Skipping ahead a bit, it works. I'll guess E. Nope. How about S? Nope. U? Maybe R? T? Dang, what is this? Well, after nearly trying the whole alphabet, it turned out to be fly. Lovely. Anyway, let's try another one. This is checkers. Again, I can't quite figure out the commands on this without reading the manual, so I'll do that later. Alright, so I was not sure if I didn't try to get bolts for the Apple I devices like iPhones and iPads and stuff like that. Hello and welcome back to the 8-Bit Guy. So in this episode, I'm going to assemble the PE6502 computer. Now this is a hobbyist computer that's meant to be assembled at home, and this is actually a prototype. Now this computer is supposed to be Apple I compatible, so you should be able to run Apple I software on it and BASIC and stuff like that. However, I spent a couple of hours talking with Jason on the phone. He's the guy that designed this, and he said he likes to call it Apple 1.5 compatible because it's a bit.
All right, that's it. I'll see you tomorrow, my lovely, lovely, lovely viewers. I'll see